So Brad Parks, I manage product and go-to-market here at Morpheus. I'm going to run through a kind of a quick intro. I'm going to try and keep it to 15 or 20 minutes and then turn a bulk of the time over to my partners in crime, Dave Estes and Martez Reed, who are there in the room physically. And we're going to go through technical demos on a number of different topics. But to start out, I'll do some slides, but that'll be really the large extent of the slideware, just to give everyone a baseline understanding of what Morpheus does, where we fit, and how we've seen this market space around hybrid cloud management evolve over the last few years. Jumping in, though, for those who have seen me do this dog and pony show before, I set a precedent a number of years ago when I did my hook for my session, and I've decided to continue that. So it is our 5th cloud field day, and over the last handful of years, I've used movie references liberally to kind of attach a little meaning to what Morpheus does. In the beginning, we hit Princess Bride. Cloud doesn't mean what you think it means. Did a little Labyrinth, Back to the Future, Top Gun. You can see I'm a child of the 80s. And in thinking about what my hook was going to be for this 5th installment, I started scratching my head. I was thinking earlier this week, as a movie buff, more and more of where I consume my my entertainment is actually the streaming services, right? We're all addicted to binge watching things. So I decided to take a different angle. It's like, man, I got Netflix, I got Disney, what's out there, HBO Max. Like, what could I use as my hook? At first, I thought, Succession, it just ended. It was an epic run. And, there's a lot of succession happening out there in the marketplace. Maybe I could use a little Succession hook, but I was a little dark. Broadcom VMware, a little bit like what's happening with Waystar and Royco on Succession. Yellow Jackets, also a little dark. No one would describe an IT team gone wrong as being stuck, frozen, and turning on each other. So those are both a little bit dark. What is a slightly happier view of streaming that I could use as my hook? Then I realized, what do we do, right? We really were born to bring teams together, right? We're all about developer self-service. A lot of the topics we're going to hit on today are around simplifying how developers, finance, operations teams all work together to simplify how they're consuming and interacting with hybrid clouds, containers, automation tools, which brought me to the obvious choice of what would be a good hook, Ted Lasso. I also like his color scheme. It happens to be Morpheus brand appropriate. But I like this quote. He's full of pithy wisdom for those who've seen Ted Lasso, right? Taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse. If you're comfortable while you're doing it, you're probably doing it wrong. We sell change, right? When we're out talking to enterprises about moving into developer self-service, that touches on a lot of parts of the organization. And as we get into the technical part of the demo, I think you'll see how we're exposing different aspects of the platform to different personas, and that can both eliminate friction, but it also exposes a lot of historical friction in the enterprises and the environments that we're working with, right? How does dev work with ops? Where does security play? How does finance play in those conversations? How do we bring that together into the platform itself? So thought Ted Lasso was a good one. And for those who do follow the show, he has this pyramid of success up on the office wall. And I just thought it was an interesting thing that even though it's applied to sports, John Wooden was coach at UCLA. Ted Lasso has adopted this in his pattern inside his job as a soccer coach. But I think anything on here would probably be worth highlighting for an IT team trying to go down this path of platform operations and bringing people together. So that's my hook. Let's jump into how we make that real, though, as a platform. So this is a slide. It's a graphic I stole from one of our customers several years back, but I still bring it forward because it represents really the pain that we see when we're out working with enterprises. The amount of tools and manual handoffs that have to happen inside of an IT organization are myriad, and it's what has historically been a challenge for those who are on the app dev side requesting resources from IT. All of the steps that have to happen to actually deliver a production-ready application service, multi-tier application stack, and get that back on the other side, that can often take hours, days, weeks for IT to get through because of all of the manual handoffs. And whether that's on premises in private cloud and hypervisor environments, whether that's up in the public cloud, there is still a lot of manual work that happens inside a large, complex IT organization. And at its heart, Morpheus is about trying to automate and eliminate those manual handoffs, but also enable developers, finance teams, and IT operations teams to work together to get more value out of those hybrid IT environments. One of the things that we've seen over the last kind of year and a half, and I think it's led to a lot of the growth that we've seen as a company, is the stand up of platform engineering and platform operations teams. So, as a charter, these platform teams are trying to enable developer self-service. And this is something a number of years ago, we'd talk about demo, we'd get on field day, we'd be all excited. When we were talking to an enterprise 3 or 4 years ago, they could get excited about a demo. They'd say, yes, I want a developer to be able to go into a portal, hit a unified API, and get what they need without having to wait. But as IT organizations 4 or 5 years ago, they didn't have a platform team. They were still maybe immature in how they were approaching automation. They didn't have a budget defined around platform frameworks. If I fast forward to today, we're seeing more and more platform teams showing up in the enterprise. And I think it's one of the reasons we grew more in the last 45 days of 2022 than we did the entirety of 2015 to 2020. So we're seeing more and more enterprises adopting platform thinking, and it represents a few different areas. One of the patterns that we see when we're out talking to an enterprise, first and foremost, they are trying to simplify how they deal with on-premises and public cloud environments. So typically that's, a lot of their workloads running on-prem on VMware, more and more out in one of the public clouds. But these same platform teams are also trying to help their organizations modernize their apps, expose things like containers and clusters as a service. So they're also trying to wrestle, how do they deal with bare metal, VMs, and containers. One of the other patterns and what we're going to see as we go into some of the technical demos is they've got automation teams trying to take advantage of technologies like Terraform and Ansible, but those teams don't always scale. It's hard to find enough people fluent in those technologies to scale across an enterprise that might have 20, 30, 40,000 VMs under management. How do you help those teams scale their automation initiatives? And then the last piece is, how do you deal with things like ITSM, ServiceNow? The joke I often say is the technologies that we see time and time again are VMware, AWS, OpenShift, Terraform, Ansible, and ServiceNow. Those are very common. I look like the six-fingered man from Princess Bride. Those are the technologies that these platform teams are trying to figure out. How do I put my hands on the reins and help my organization integrate and get value from those technologies while still moving faster? And that is at its heart what Morpheus does. We bring those technologies together and enable self-service. What defines the cloud? It's what defines a high-functioning DevOps team, and it is at the heart of Morpheus. First core use case, and what David's going to touch on in depth when we go into the technical demo, is how we're enabling consistent provisioning into any public and private cloud so that teams don't have to become experts in every different cloud that they're provisioning into. Most of the providers that we're talking to have 3 or more clouds under management, and that could be on-prem as well as the public cloud. So we're going to give them a consistent GUI interface, a unified API, or a unified Terraform provider to provision into those endpoints in a consistent way. Second, we're not going to touch on it in depth in this 90 minutes, but in past field days, we have talked about the ability to do Kubernetes clusters on demand. So how do you take advantage of that move from bare metal and VMs to containers without having to stand up yet another silo around container management? Third, Martez is going to hit on how we're helping automation teams scale by putting Morpheus in front of technologies like Terraform and Ansible to enable self-service, not for just provisioning, but also day 2. And then lastly, we integrate into things like ServiceNow, as well as third-party monitoring tools to help simplify how those day 2 operations happen. So these are the use cases we're going to unpack over the course of the next 90 minutes. But one of the other pieces, flipping at 90 degrees, that we often run into when we're talking to big enterprises are the people. right? IT would be great if it weren't for the people, right? How do you get an IT organization who's having trouble just keeping up? How do you get them happy alongside the security team that's trying to improve their security posture and embed that into development processes? How to get developers what they need using the tools they already like without forcing new patterns on them? And then lastly, how does finance get what they need out of the equation? So some of the features that we're going to hit on in the technical part of the demo, right? While self-service, so those use cases I touched on are the core, one of the things that we have become famous for, one of the things when we're actually talking to IT teams is how fast we're able to actually integrate all of those on-prem tools to get a true private cloud environment. How do we connect to the public cloud? And how do we help them automate the end-to-end workflows to get to those outcomes? When we're thinking about the security persona, though, we're not a security tool, but we do connect into different identity providers, have a very fine-grained RBAC model. We're fully multi-tenanted. We have a policy engine that makes sure that security gets what they need out of a hybrid cloud. Make sure that developers, product teams that are provisioning resources are doing that in a secure fashion. We can even touch on how we're able to manage and rotate credentials, some of the integrations we have into technologies like HashiCorp Vault, CyberArk. So we've got a lot of features we'll dig into on the security front. One of the core consumers, though, of the platform are development teams. And here's where we can help them use the tools, the processes they already have. When they're completing their builds, they're going into test. How do we stand up environments on demand very, very quickly using the patterns that they already know? And then lastly, for that finance user, when we first install, we're going to integrate into a on-prem vCenter, a public cloud account, a Nutanix environment, inventory everything that's already there, start to provide right-sizing guidance on how they can actually reduce their cost footprint, but also put guardrails around how people are approaching spend in the public cloud or resource consumption in those private environments. One of the other pieces we can touch on in the demo is because we're attached to every cloud cluster, we have information on tagging, users, apps. We have this normalized data model that can be very powerful to enable things like chargeback and showback if you're an enterprise, or billing if you're a service provider. Service providers actually account for about 35% of our total customer base. So a couple of things that we'll hit on when we get into the technical part of the demo is the platform framework itself. We've provisioned now nearly 1 million workloads under management today. We know a thing or two about how patterns evolve, what steps it takes to stand up and provision an enterprise workload. We've taken that and we've pulled it into an abstraction model, and we have a rich set of services under the covers that Martez and David will go into that help us stand up these applications and automate a lot of those manual handoffs. But one of the most powerful parts of the platform is how we're integrating into a lot of the tools and technologies that are already out there, right? So very quickly, we can take a lot of the tools that are already out there, integrate with them so that we're helping companies take advantage of what they've already got stood up, but eliminate the manual handoffs across that. So if we need to add a resource provider for IP address management, for an example, we want to make sure that's not a manual script that someone's going to have to handcraft just to get something like request or release an IP address. So one of the things we'll touch on is how quickly we can integrate into these environments, but also the plugin framework that we have to actually extend the value of the platform and add new third-party providers, either things that we've developed as Morpheus, but more and more we're starting to work with third-party technology providers like Oracle, like Efficient IP, others that have started to take advantage of this plugin framework. In addition to automating all those handoffs, we've also got a very agnostic view to the cloud endpoints that we can provision into. We know that not every enterprise is 100% VMware or Microsoft or Nutanix or AWS. Most big enterprises have 3 or more cloud endpoints at play across private and public infrastructure, and we want to give them the freedom to blueprint how they're provisioning into environments, but then switch as needed. And honestly, with the Broadcom acquisition of VMware, we've seen more and more big enterprises start to look at Morpheus as a way to hedge their bets and provision consistently into VMware today, Nutanix tomorrow, maybe Oracle KVM the day after that, AWS, we want to give them a consistent way to provision and freedom of choice so that they're not having to re-script a lot of manual handoffs over time. One of the more powerful parts of the platform that we'll dig into in the automation section is how we can embed tasks and automation into the life cycle of a workload, but also handle day two automation, right? How do you attach automation and run tasks and jobs against fleets of machines out there in the wild for things like patch management? How do you take advantage of automation and provide self-service to things like landing zone startup? So the automation engine is a core part of how we're delivering value to customers. But I touched on that plugin framework. So one of the bits we're going to touch on in the demo later is the plugin framework. So historically, when we would need to integrate with a third-party technology, Morpheus would take on that engineering effort. But over the last couple of years, we've extended this out. So now we have open sourced a lot of plugins. We're doing more and more with third-party technology providers to help them write their own plugins and extend the value of the platform. So wrapping it up, and then I'm going to turn it over to my technical counterparts. We're going to hit on kind of speed of deployment, how we can very quickly integrate with all those technologies. We want to touch on how we're able to reduce tool sprawl by bringing more value into the platform framework, eliminate islands of tooling. Already touched on how we're able to eliminate lock-in. And then lastly, because application libraries are very complex in the enterprise, we know that companies are in some level of modernization across bare metal, VM, containers, and cloud native services. So we'll touch on how we can span all of those horizontally across different cloud endpoints. So
what really interests me is the plugin idea.
Yeah.
That's a common pattern for a lot of tools out there that want to integrate with a ton of different providers. And I'm curious, how easy is it for an existing service to develop a plugin?
Mhm.
And what's their incentive for doing so? Are you seeing enough demand out there from the customers to get these plugins developed? And do you have any customers that are also developing them internally because the vendor doesn't?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the challenges with a plugin framework, right? Some other providers have used that as code to say, hey, we can do anything, but you get these brittle networks of plugins that take weeks or months to actually pull together. We're still going to curate those third-party integrations as much as possible to maintain that rapid time to value. But good example, we have a partner in Korea. They have sovereign clouds. They need to keep data in country. As a market for us, we weren't going to take on that engineering effort. It just wasn't, in our priority makeup, something we were going to get to. This partner wrote a cloud plugin so that they could provide some differentiation within their market. They developed it pretty quickly. I think another one, David can probably comment, I think Efficient IP is one that literally we did that plugin in a day. So because we've got a pretty good history of integrating with these third-party technologies, we're starting to provide more and more examples of these plugins so that partners or customers can start to do their own development. I honestly think most of the development work is going to be by third-party alliances, maybe systems integrators versus customers themselves. But there's nothing stopping a customer from, branching one of our plugins, taking a look at it and doing some of their own work. We do work with, Fortune 1000, 2000 shops that have, pretty deep expertise. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of them started to take on a little of that effort.
Are you vetting or classifying those plugins like official Morpheus data plugins, partner plugins that we verified, et cetera?
Great question. I'm actually, I have an open rec if anyone's looking, because we've spent the last year kind of building it out, right? Getting our legs under us. We are at the point now that we do need to more formalize how do we test, certify, expose, that plugin framework and ecosystem. So when we get into one of Martez's sessions here in a bit, we'll go into the share portal. He'll talk a little bit more deeply about the plugin framework itself and how we're extending it out. But yes, good question. Ones I'm asking myself. No clear answers, but it's a known thing we got to go do here over the next set of weeks and months.
All right.
All right. What else we got?
Okay, I'll go ahead and ask mine just for clarity. So as we dig into this net, I see you grinning there. So great question. Bare metal, right? I know that we've got other vendors that are handling that, but did you say that one of the use cases we're going to go through in the demo is going to deep dive into bare metal or just kind of brush across it?
We'll probably brush across it. That's probably its own thing. But from as a cloud provider, so Canonical MAS is one of the providers.
Exactly.
We've done some integration with OneView from HPE, Cisco UCS. I know you got the rack-in guys there. I've talked with them a bit. So yeah, it is a use case, and it's one we've got some large service providers actually using us to spin up, clusters on bare metal out at the edge. But I think the bulk of the use case, honestly, is us in front of VMware. That's a slam dunk, right? Replacing something like a VRA is our bread and butter, but we do have active customers using us for bare metal.